Hi, hello, how are you? Happy New Year. My name is Helen and this is what the redhead said. I read 92, might be 93 books in 2022 and I am gonna preface this video with I am not one of those people who you see on TikTok and on YouTube who are very sparing with 5-star reviews. I think if a book is amazing, then you need to rate it amazingly. Out of those 93 books I read last year, 17 of them were 5-star reads. Out of those 17, I whittled them down to a top 10. My top 3 are fixed, they are my absolute top 3s. My top 5 I think is also somewhat fixed, but if you ask me if I'm in a different mood, then they could be different. 6 to 10 are absolutely, like, it could flip-flop all over the place. 11 to 17, again, if you ask me on a different day, they could easily be in 6 to 10. But 1 to 5, I am like 98% certain on. 1 to 3, I am 100% certain on. Now that my prefaces are out the way, let's start with some honourable mentions. Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. The Twyford Code by Janice Hallett. It killed me that I couldn't quite justify this in the top 10. The Life Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. The only teen book that I gave 5 stars in 2022, and it is Twin Crowns by Catherine Doyle and Catherine Webber. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Oh, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Julia and the Shark by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. And my last one is 4 Aunties and a Wedding by Jessie C. Tanto. If you wanted to follow me on my Instagram, I am at redheadred, and you can find all of my 5-star reviews for these 5-star reads. A move that I'm sure surprises no one who has been following me for any length of time. Number 10 is Go Tales the Beads That I Am Gone by Diana Gabaldon. Of the later novels, this is definitely the most domestic, which is why I loved it so much, and I just cried through the last 100 pages. I know it took her 7 years to write this one, and I really hope it doesn't take another 7 to get to the last one, because I need it now. This is probably a favouritism pick, and I'm okay with that. Pick Jamie and Claire are my favourite Jamie and Claire, and you get a lot of it once they're settled on the ridge in bees. From domestic family bliss, as much of bliss as you can get in Outlander, to the very opposite. Book 9 is How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie. I sold this book to customers as being murder but make it girl boss. Because she is a celebrity author or is the wife of a celebrity, I didn't have high expectations for this book going into it. I knew it as a name publish, and I thought it might be alright, but it might be just another name, you know? It's not another name. The idea is that Grace wants to get back at her dad who abandoned her and her mum by systematically killing off his family so that she gets the inheritance. Grace is also recounting this escapade from prison, so you know that at some point it goes badly wrong. But she's also imprisoned for a murder that she didn't commit. And although she's killed multiple people, I think it might be 5, I really found myself rooting for her because she doesn't think she's doing anything particularly wrong. She's doing all of this to avenge her mum. The blurb on the back from Red says deliciously dark. I agree with that. Ugh. Murder but make it girl boss. Another murder book now, but on the flip side, we are trying to track them down and not protect them in their nefarious ways. The Maid by Nita Prose. The Maid follows a maid, her name is Molly. She works at a very fancy hotel, and she is somewhere on the autism spectrum. It's never fully specified, but it's there, it's part of her character, and it's part of her character because others perceive her as being odd. So when she is clearing up after a guest and she discovers them dead in their hotel room, the odd maid goes from being the person who found the body to being a suspect. I gave this one 5 stars mostly because of Molly. It's first person narrative, so you're right in her head, and Molly lived with her gran, who has now died, and so she's very old-fashioned and she's very set in her ways because these are things that her gran passed down to her, and she hasn't had much social interaction apart from kind of listening in on people. 6 and 7 are very interchangeable in their placements, but not interchangeable in their contents. These are also the only 2 children's books that have made the list. Like a Charm by Elle McNichol, The School for Good and Evil by Soman Chainani. Face value, they are both fantasy books, similar-ish kind of covers. You can see they both have castles on the cover, and that's kind of where the similarities end. Let's start with Like a Charm. I adore Elle McNichol. I think she's one of the very, very best examples of neurodiverse writing in children's or adult literature. I think she's one of the very best contemporary children's authors we have in this country. This is the first in what will be a duology, Like a Curse is out in February, and I cannot wait. The premise of this is that Ramya moves with her mum and dad to Edinburgh, and she can see magical creatures and people with magical abilities, but no one else around her can. Ramya is also autistic, which similarly to Molly, she's kind of overlooked. She's thought that people think that she's weird. People don't necessarily trust her because she's odd, when really she's just spotting things other people don't see. I went to Edinburgh this past year with my friend, and I was super excited because I had already read Like a Charm, so I was going around going, this is a magical city. Still children's fantasy, but very different. School for Good and Evil. There was a Netflix film which, although looked beautiful and although my friend worked on it, does not do the justice in any way, shape or form. So the basic premise is that there are 2 best friends, Agatha and Sophie. One is a witch, one is a princess, or rather a witch and a princess in waiting. And they get swept up out of their village of Gabaldon wrote Outlander, and taken to 2 schools, the School for Good and the School for Evil. Except the princess goes to the witch school and the witch goes to the princess school. I can understand why Netflix took some liabilities in the film, not to do the actors down, like Sophia Anne Caruso and Sophia Wiley did the best job with what they were given. What they were necessarily given was not that good. The film kind of leans into the love triangle, where really it's about these 2. It's about female friendship, it's about jealousy, it's about self-perception. Just because people have always said that you're ugly and therefore must be a witch does not mean you are either of those things. It is about all of the tropes and expectations of women, and specifically women in fairy tales, and pulling them apart. And also it's really scary. Big ending where, and I feel like I can give a spoiler because Netflix did the film, Sophie the princess becomes her full witch self. It's really, really scary. And I love children's fiction that doesn't shy away from that, doesn't try to be, it's for children, so it must tone it down. Because the end of Like a Charm is quite scary as well, but this is dark. And Tedros, the boy stuck in the middle of these 2, not worth it. I'm now halfway through this series and I'm just having a really great time with it. The eagle-eyed among you might have noticed that this is 4. That's because I lent out one of them and haven't received it back in time. Book number 5 of the year is Hex by Jenny Fagan. This teeny tiny little book is 100 pages, or I think more specifically 101, and it tore me to shreds. It tells the story of the last hours of Galis Dungan, who was tried as a witch in the year 1591 in Edinburgh. When I first heard that this book existed, I thought it would be quite cool and mysterious and a lot like Outlander, because Geillis is a character in Outlander. What I didn't know is that the character of Geillis Duncan was very loosely based on a real person, and this is her story. The night before she dies, Geillis is visited by a modern day witch who kind of astral projects into the past so that Geillis doesn't die alone. It's brutal, it's incredible. It's so hard to explain how, again, this tiny little book, 101 pages, just absolutely ripped me apart. And at the same time, I felt so powerful because so much of it, when they're talking about being a witch, is not about it being a crime, but rather that it shouldn't be a crime, because to be a witch is to be magic, and to be a woman is to be magic. You hold portals in your body. I'm like holding my stomach, I'm not pregnant. To be a woman is to be able to create life and hold magic within yourself. So why is that same magic a crime? And also, Geillis had committed no crime at all. She was set up by men. Smash the patriarchy. If you have a spare afternoon, and if you don't have a spare afternoon, make one and read Hex. Number 4 is the only non-fiction that I gave 5 stars in 2022. I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy. Yes, we can all see my ring light, we're gonna have to deal with it. You know how I was talking earlier about not being sure about Bella Mackie because celebrity author? I had a similar experience going into I'm Glad My Mum Died, and also coupled with this had a huge amount of press because it's celebrity author, and this blew me away. It's well documented, but I'm just going to run through. This is told in little vignettes and memories from Jeanette McCurdy's life, who was in iCarly, and how she never wanted to be an actress. She did it to please her mum. She didn't shower by herself till she was 17. She was subject to intrusive bodily checks to test if she had breast cancer. She wasn't allowed to look after her own money, even though she was the one making the money. She was encouraged into eating disorders and calorie restrictions. It's mind-boggling. I think as well this cover is the most genius marketing and the most incredible book cover that I've seen for quite some time. 10 out of 10 to whatever publicity and marketing team were designing this, because it's beautiful. I think Jeanette has some fiction books coming up in the next year or two, so I'll be really interested to see if her writing style in non-fiction translates into her fiction. My top 3 book of 2022 is Impossible by Sarah Lotz. They can't be together. It is impossible, and yet they are soulmates. There's so much I want to say about this book, but I can't, because the plot twist is, for me, and the reason it ranked so highly is that this is one of the plot twists for the past year. The book is split up into parts, and each part is kind of loosely based around a different rom-com, so though it's new material, like this is very much an original story, it feels familiar because you've got different 90s rom-coms running throughout it. It is a sunshine grumpy pairing. It is a forbidden love. It is so much yearning. I read this book in March, and however many months later, 9 months later, I still cannot stop thinking about this book. Maybe it's because it's a romance that was out in hardback that it didn't do as well, and I think this book is criminally underrated. And the paperback comes out, which, if there is a date for it, I'll put this here. I'm going to be firmly getting behind this, and I think that everyone should run to your nearest bookshop, ideally an independent, and get yourself a copy. Their Love is Impossible. Book 2 is the one that I gave my mum to read and she didn't give it back to me. So I will put something on the screen here, although it's been sneakily behind me this whole time and my heat mug is now losing its heat while I've been filming. Book 2 of the year is The Change by Kirsten Miller. Now, the publicity team behind this book were, again, exceptional, 10 out of 10, and did in fact send me a whole press packet with the book. I have the mug, and also next to me I have a bag. It's not over, it's time. The Change. Again, I think this book is so underrated. I can't believe I've not seen it in more wrap-ups and in more Instagram posts, and again, maybe it's because the hardback or maybe it's the patriarchy, but The Change follows 3 women who have come into witchy powers with the menopause, and they use it to stop a sex trafficking ring and to take down the patriarchy. What struck me the most about this book is that it was so unflinching in talking about menopause, and that's not something that I've seen in fiction ever, really. Not only are these women menopausal, they are having great sex lives, they're having fulfilled lives in themselves, and their magic comes from this. Just like Sophie evolves into her final form as a witch, Nessa, Harriet and Jo are doing the same thing, but they aren't doing it to take down a fairy tale nemesis. They are doing it to take down men who abuse women in their area. They are harnessing their powers. So the only one who doesn't really have menopause powers is Nessa, because she can see the dead, and she's had that power for a while, but it's a power that only women in her family have had. Jo takes a hot flush, the power of a hot flush, and makes fire. Harriet is a whole other entity. I would like to be her when I grow up. And I was so set on The Change being my top book of 2022 until a little something came along. Babel by R.F. Kuang. This book is a masterpiece of literature, of colonial and post-colonial literature, of discussion on race and gatekeeping of language, workers' rights, and Rebecca R.F. Kuang was heading up the protests and the strikes at HarperCollins. It's about power of language, the power that language has, that is its own form of magic, and using that language to make and fund an empire. Empires cost things, and those things are lives, and those lives do not belong to white people. There is not a single dark academia book, or any book, as good as Babel right now. Genuinely, like, I have so many words to say, and yet also not a single word to say, except it's a fucking masterpiece of literature. And so here are my top 3, and actually they're very, very different books. A forbidden love romantic comedy, a feminist takedown, and post-colonial literature. I can only hope that my reading in 2023 is as diverse and as beautiful. I am reading The Atlas Paradox by Olivia Blake. I've been on this for quite some time. It's quite heavy, and whilst I loved Atlas 6, the reason I gave it 4.5 and not 5 stars is because all the magic is set in some form of science and physics, and that goes right over my head. And there's even more kind of physics and reasoning in Paradox, so I'm reading it slower than I think I would have usually read something. More so as well than Atlas 6 in Atlas Paradox is bisexual chaos, which I'm here for. You can also find me on TikTok at redheadred and on Instagram at redheadred. Until then, bye!